Next.js has just dropped a new feature that's trying to fundamentally change how we build for the web. It's called Partial Prerendering, and honestly, it's being sold as a pretty radical solution to a problem that has been bugging developers for well over a decade. Okay, let's get into it.
You know, for as long as we've been building modern websites, we've had to make this brutal choice. Do you want your site to be incredibly fast, or do you want it to be fully dynamic and personalized for every single user? Getting both at the same time has always felt like a pipe dream.
And yeah, for years, that all-or-nothing trade-off was just the law of the land. If even one tiny little part of your page needed user-specific data, like, say, a shopping cart icon, the entire page had to be rendered dynamically on the server, killing your speed. But what if we could finally break that rule?
Traditionally, we've been caught between these two extremes. On one side, you've got static site generation, or SSG. Think of it like pre-baking your entire website. It's super fast, but what you see is what everybody gets. On the other side, you've got server-side rendering, SSR, which custom builds the page for every visitor. It's perfectly personalized, but that takes time, request after request.
So the journey to fix this has really been a series of compromises. We went from fully static to fully dynamic. Then we tried to find some middle ground with things like Incremental Static Regeneration, or ISR. And that was great for updating content for everyone, but it still couldn't really handle individual user personalization. Every step was just another compromise, which led us here, to the need for a true hybrid solution.
And that brings us to partial pre-rendering, or PPR, as you'll hear it called. This is Next.js's big swing at finally providing that elegant, unified solution we've all been waiting for.
Okay, so the big question, what is partial pre-rendering? At its core, it's a hybrid. The idea is you generate a static HTML shell of your page when you build your site, all the parts that are the same for everybody. But you strategically leave holes in that shell for all the dynamic, personalized stuff which gets filled in later. The architecture itself works in 3 pretty straightforward steps. First, that static shell gets built and cached on a global edge network so it's instantly available to users anywhere in the world. Second, that shell has placeholders. Those are the dynamic holes. And finally, when you visit the page, the server renders only the content for those holes and streams it into the shell. The cool part is, it all happens in one single seamless response.
And this really gets to the heart of the philosophical change here. With PPR, you're supposed to stop thinking about whether an entire page is static or dynamic. Instead, your job as a developer just becomes identifying the dynamic boundaries. Basically, pointing out which specific components need that live, fresh data.
So how does this all work under the hood? Like, how does Next.js know where to punch those dynamic holes? Well, the magic ingredient here is actually a feature from React itself called suspense.
And the way you use it is surprisingly simple. By wrapping any dynamic component in this suspense boundary, you're essentially telling Next.js, hey, this part right here is dynamic. Go ahead and pre-render everything else, but stream this piece in when the user shows up. You even provide a fallback like a loading skeleton that gets baked right into that initial static shell.
The benefit becomes incredibly obvious when you look at how it handles dynamic functions. In the old world, if you used a function like cookies anywhere on your page, the entire page was immediately forced into slow, server-side rendering. With PPR and suspense, the page stays a fast, static shell, and only the tiny component that actually uses the cookies gets streamed in. That is a massive performance win.
An e-commerce product page is the perfect example, right? Think about it. The product title, the description, the images, that's all static. It's part of the shell. But the shopping cart count, your personalized recommendations, the livestock data, that's your dynamic content, streamed right into those holes. The user gets to see the main product instantly, while all the personalized bits load in seamlessly a moment later.
So the promise is huge, no doubt, but we gotta ground ourselves in reality here. What's the real story with PPR right now? Let's talk hype versus reality.
So where does PPR actually fit in with all the strategies we already have? Well, it really shines in a couple of key ways. Just like static generation, it gives you an instant time to first byte because that shell is coming right from the edge. But by streaming in the rest, it also helps improve the largest contentful paint, a really key performance metric. It's truly trying to deliver the best of both worlds.
And the early adopters who really get the vision, they are incredibly excited. I mean, look at this developer on Reddit calling it a killer feature, saying it's the final piece that makes the whole Next.js app router vision make sense. The hype is definitely real.
But, and this is a big but, the official Next.js documentation is very, very clear. PPR is still experimental and is explicitly not recommended for production. And that's a pretty crucial warning sign that we have to take seriously. And the reason for that warning becomes obvious when you look at the challenges. People who are trying it out are reporting things like build timeouts, some weird behavior with more complex routes, and just a general confusion in the community about how it's really different from what we already had. The technology is promising for sure, but it's just not mature yet.
So, with all that context, let's zoom out a bit and ask the bigger question. What does PPR really mean for the future of the web? Is this actually going to be the new default?
It's really important to see that Next.js isn't doing this in a vacuum. Other frameworks are trying to solve the exact same problem, just from different angles. You have Remix, which is server-first, really leaning into web standards. And you have Astro, which is content-first, starting with zero JavaScript and then adding interactive islands. Each one has its own distinct philosophy.
You know, they all share the same goal, but they're starting from totally different places. You can kind of think of it like this. Astro starts static and then adds dynamic bits. Remix starts dynamic and then tries to optimize it. Next.js, with PPR, is trying to create a true hybrid-first model that doesn't force you to pick a side at all.
And that is the ultimate goal here. The dream of PPR is to automate the absolute best rendering strategy for every single piece of your application, making it the simple, obvious default for building pretty much anything on the web.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating final thought. We have spent years debating SSG versus SSR, but what if the future isn't about choosing a strategy anymore? What if the future is about frameworks just being smart enough to make that choice for us, component by component, so we can get back to just building cool stuff?